Welcome back. You're still tuned in to News and Views with myself, Salailo Makwidiri, and we're going to be discussing, I think, one of the most shocking, declarations that we've seen in recent times. U.S. President Donald Trump has unleashed a trade war that directly targets South Africa, slapping an almost crippling 30% tariff on our exports. With the smirk and a dismissive tone, Trump twice alluded to bad things going on in South Africa, offering no specifics, but making it clear that this move was about more than just trade. It was a political power play. This aggressive economic strike comes as part of Trump's sweeping reciprocal tariff plan, which hits some of America's closest allies and biggest trading partners with punitive levies. While the UK and Singapore face only 10% tariffs, and even economic giants like Japan, who got a 24%, and China 34%, got an almost softer blow, but South Africa finds itself among the hardest hit. The stakes are enormous. This could devastate South African industries, further escalate tensions between South Africa and the US, and reshape economic alliances, global economic alliances. And to help us unpack the political and social consequences of this tariff shockwave, we are joined by Professor Patrick Bond, a political economist, a scholar of social mobilization, and a critic of global finance power structures. Prof, thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure having you on Salam Media, and welcome.
Very nice to be with you. Salam alaikum, salalo.
I think we can just kickstart with your reaction. This is something that we've known for some time that it might happen, but it's finally here. What do you make of it? A big power play and a big hand being shown there by Donald Trump.
Yes, Trump has done far worse damage, I think, not only to the world economy, to South Africa's economy, in some ways. We'll have to look at the nuances, but also to his own political standpoint, because he had campaigned so strongly against inflation, and yet the price of goods in the US is going to soar as a result of these very high tariffs. They were higher than expected, with the exception of Mexico and Canada that weren't as high because they still have their NAFTA 2.0, in other words, a trade agreement that Trump had originally, in his first term, negotiated. And there's been a lot of tension, especially between Canada and the US. But aside from that, the integration of world capitalism, and especially Chinese inputs into the global value chain, will really hit the US consumer and also the US economy. And there's talk now of a relatively early and long recession as a result. Higher inflation rates, as I say, which means a much lower popularity, since Donald Trump said, if you raise tariffs, you won't get price increases during his election campaign. And I think we've seen in the last couple of days some of the areas where Trump is weakest, especially when his favored candidate in Wisconsin, one of the key states, one of the crucial swing states, lost yesterday a major election, which was over Supreme Court of that state, in which our own South African Elon Musk had put $20 million of his own money to the Republican candidate, and the Democrat won by 10%. That's just one indication. Another is that 4 senators, and don't forget he's got a relatively minor majority of 52 to 48, but 4 of them switched on the question of tariffs, especially to Canada yesterday. So there's already signs that Trump's capacity to just do what he wants, and with Elon Musk throwing the money out, win his objectives now may actually have come to an end.
I want to bring it a bit closer to home. First, starting with South Africa, and maybe just branching off to the rest of the continent. South Africa has been hit with a 30% tariff hike. All South Africans are asking the same question. What does this mean for us? What does it mean for me personally? And how is this going to change my life?
Well, because, Salelo, the crucial exports, including automobiles, they got a 25% increase, and that just over and above the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act. That has sent Parks Tao this week to our trade minister to the United States to try to beg for a lower tariff increase on automobiles, especially Mercedes, BMW, VW, Toyota, and Ford. And those are the main exporters. And they do about 35 billion rand a year of exports to the United States. And whether they can quickly find other markets, you can pretty quickly predict that the consumption of automobiles in the US is going to collapse. And even the companies that are making cars in the US, like Ford, have already been looking to offshore because of the price differentials that are growing and ability that they still have to make more profits offshore. They may have to rethink that now. But that means that we'll have a lower demand from the US without a doubt. And whether it means that we now will see a much lower output level of automobiles, because the US market has been very important for luxury cars and also for diesel and petrol, because we don't do any electric vehicles. So that may force us to make the kind of changes that are definitively needed, that South Africa could be a great exporter of electric vehicles. And now this may be one of those sort of punches to the gut that forces the automakers to change their policies. It may mean that if they consume less electricity because they have lower output in case they cannot find new markets, it may mean there's more for the rest of us. And that, Salelo, especially goes for our steel and the aluminium coming from Richards Bay, the major consumer of South African electricity. And if the 30% tariffs lower U.S. demand for South African steel and aluminium, just like an AGOA cut was expected to do, I would say there may be some positive benefits. We've entered another period where we had a few weeks ago stage 6 load shedding and stage 2 and 3 on and off. And if we are short electricity, and we see that one company takes 7% of our grid, gets it at 30 South African cents a kilowatt hour. I think you and I are paying about R2.40, 8 times as much. That company, BHP Billiton, an Australian company, that company will now basically be much less capable of exporting. And hopefully then the electricity that goes into BHP Billiton will decline, and it will be redistributed to labor-intensive industries and small businesses and the households who need it, instead of having a load shedding or load reduction. So there may be some benefits, and especially the benefits from moving away from a very, very volatile partner. The US simply cannot be trusted on anything anymore.
And I think you're just touching on my follow-up question, that I think we're seeing the US almost shifting towards a protectionism, outlook, an almost inward-looking protectionist policy. And the next question would be, how should now South Africa reposition itself, both diplomatically and economically, given this newfound reality?
Well, not only protectionist, because Salela, as you've said, South Africa is being targeted specifically again and again. Earlier this week, it was the U.S.-South African military relationships that were broken. I think that's actually perfectly helpful for repositioning South Africa, not to have AFRICOM in such tight connection to South Africa. But there are so many other ways in which, for example, expulsion of Ibrahim Rasool, the ambassador, the various ways in which Afrikaners are being mythologized as major victims, even genocide victims, all sorts of attacks on South Africa. And it does go to suggest that there's not just a protectionist ideology, an anti-South African ideology. Obviously, South Africa's role in promoting the cause of Palestine has been something that the US despises. And in addition to that, a broader ideology has taken place of what we used to call neoconservative and neoliberal, let's say a fusion of those two approaches. Neoliberal for the free markets and lower trade barriers, obviously that's gone now, and the neoconservative for the projection of US military power. That's still clear. The Yemenis know that right now, so do all the Palestinians and all sorts of victims of US militarism. Those will probably continue. But there's a new ideology, paleoconservatism, Stone Age, right? Or they call it populist nationalism, a right-wing ideology that expands into attacks on not only the minorities in the US, African Americans, Mexicans, but also the xenophobia against anything, really, the immigrants, but particularly then, as you say, protectionism economically. But it does go beyond that into misogyny and the denial of reproductive rights for women. It goes into terrains of sort of make America great again, that is harking back to a white male sort of power structure. And I think that's going to rub up against so many people the more it actually takes effect. The slashing and burning by Elon Musk of the US bureaucracy has already led to major protests last Saturday, hundreds of protests across the US, 200, and across the world against Musk himself by going to Tesla stations and people dropping off of his X.com, Twitter, or trying now to think about, do we have to take Starlink as the major satellite internet connection, given that Musk just vacuums up all our data and information. Now, these are the kinds of, let's call it BDS USA, boycott, divestment, sanctions, that Trump is just asking for. And you'll see Wall Street in about 6 hours. The New York Stock Exchange is going to tank, just as stock markets are all over the world because of what he's just done last night.
I want to come back to the rest of the continent now. It seems that a lot of African countries, particularly some of the smaller ones, have been the hardest hit by this tariff hikes. I mean, looking at a country like Lesotho, they're getting an almost 50% tariff hike. Botswana 37%. When it comes to the continent and just the ripple effects of this tariff hike increase, what can we look forward to, and how the continent is going to be affected?
Well, certainly AGOA now becomes irrelevant, the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act. And you think about the major beneficiaries, Lesotho was one, with clothing and textiles, in, let's say, relatively repressive and low pay conditions, sort of a Chinese sweatshop model. Whether that's been good or bad for the Lesotho economy remains to be seen. But he's basically, Trump has chopped Lesotho's output dramatically because they did rely a lot on AGOA. The major beneficiary of AGOA, aside from South Africa, is Angola for oil. And I think, this is, you could say to some extent, blustering, because once it becomes clear that the disruption of all of these global value chains and the long relationships that African exporters have had, and also, of course, African importers from the US for finished goods, once those are disrupted, and the US has dramatically lost its soft power as well as its economic power, it's basically throwing away one of its major weapons. Of course, they would always hold over that AGOA, that whip against us, to say, okay, you shouldn't treat Afrikaners badly. That's the sort of logic we've been seeing the last two and a half months. And it seems to me that these are the, let's say, self-destructive capacities of Donald Trump. And he's got two major supporters within world capitalism, and those are big data, and it's basically the US big data companies who, as you saw on Inauguration Day, all lined up behind him. And secondly, it's big oil. And thirdly, it's big military industrial complex. So now all of those are going to be also disrupted by these sorts of, just helter-skelter tariffs. So you'll see the pressure, the diplomatic pressure on the one hand, and secondly, the economic pressure from the corporates that are going to take hits because they're global value chains, their connectivities. Even my cell phone, when I sort of use a cell phone, I'm using in materials from all over the world, child labor in Chinese mines in Eastern DRC, exploited Chinese labor in the Foxconn companies of Eastern China, and then Apple takes all the profits, and they'll be very furious at the way these tariffs are working. And I think the last point on this is really that the diplomatic pushback has to be harder. And we're all waiting to see whether Cyril Ramaphosa does what he's been doing. He asked Donald Trump for a game of golf to be able to sort out the problems on the golf course. That's obviously ridiculous, but he keeps asking. The other things he's doing is just continuing to go over. We even saw Zane Dangor, the Director General of the International Relations, probably one of the strongest officials in South Africa, being able to negotiate this week, but coming back logically with nothing. And that means I think we should put onto the agenda expulsion of the United States from the G20, because the G20 will be hosted by the United States next year. And the major ministers, the foreign minister and the finance minister, boycotted South Africa because of our slogan for the G20 this year: solidarity, equality, sustainability. It's very clear the US is against all of those. And my suggestion might be then, well, instead of a G20, a G19, maybe have Claudia Sheinbaum, the Mexican president, host the G19 in 2026 to basically say to Donald Trump, there are punishments that you're going to get. I would also say the de-dollarization agenda, which I hope in Brazil at the BRICS could be put back onto the agenda. Ibrahim Rasool said it's off the agenda. You can't talk about weakening US power without really angering Trump? Well, let's do it now. I think this is the crucial time for many reasons to get out from under the thumb, the dollar hegemony. And let's see if South Africa has a new backbone now that I think the whole world is furious with Donald Trump.
Well, there you have it, Professor Patrick Bond. Thank you so much for chatting to us. Always a pleasure getting your insights, and looking forward to chatting to you again as we are seemingly seeing a new world order unravel right before our eyes.
Thank you, Salah.
We have it, Professor Patrick Bond. You can engage with us social media at Salam Media or various social media. You can give us a call on 0116800355, or you can WhatsApp us on 0617660355. Is this the perfect time for the rest of the world to move away from America, to move away from the yoke that America has always been wielding, to the rest of the world? Is the new world order unraveling right in front of us? And does it feel like the world can do without the United States of America at this point? Well, they seem to be giving the middle finger to everyone, and there's more of us than there is of them. There's BRICS, there's ECOWAS, there's all kinds of organizations that are out there. Patrick Bond suggesting that we even expel the United States of America out of the G20, maybe have a G90, and have Mexico hosted in the next year. And I'm just thinking to myself, wouldn't that be something? We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be talking to writer, activist, and political scientist Sisonke Msimang, and we'll be talking about the heartlessness and the shamelessness of the Israeli state. And there will also be making correlations with South Africa and the government that we had, and ultimately how that was toppled with obviously the help of the rest of the world, and solidarity and the importance of solidarity. So it's going to be an interesting conversation, and we'll be having Sisonke Msimang right after this short break.